So recently I just saw Black Widow, which admittedly I was not excited for. But then when I actually saw the movie, it was pretty bad. But instead of whining about all the little things I didn't like about this movie, I took the 3 core problems that make this movie suck. So I'm gonna show you all 3 core problems so that we can together figure out why Black Widow wasn't so great. A lot of people in my movie theater seem to be really bored at this movie. Maybe it's because there is no action, right? Well, actually no, there was plenty of action. In fact, I think there was a lot of action. It's more the fact that our main characters never really reach the goal. In fact, they rarely move towards it at all. They seem to be stuck in place for the majority of the movie. We actually don't even know what the goal of the film is until about 30 minutes in. Mainly due to the fact that there's a big intro in the beginning of the movie, but even after that intro, our main character, Black Widow, seems to be stuck in place for about 10 to 12 minutes. In the beginning of the movie, we see that Natasha is running away from Ross and his men because this takes place after the events of Civil War where she's wanted. Great! Well, great until you realize this has no effect on the go or plot of the movie whatsoever. But you might argue that they still need to show the fact that she's running away and that she's a wanted fugitive, right? Yes. But there's a problem with that as well because, well, nothing happens. You see, you get this very short scene of her outsmarting Ross and getting away, but after that, it's nothing. For about 10 minutes after that, she's doing nothing but sitting around. There's nothing happening, there's nothing relevant to the story, there's just, actually, nothing. Now, I probably sound like an impatient lunatic because 10 minutes does not seem like a lot, but when you realize those 10 minutes were after a 20-minute intro, it's a big deal because all the momentum the intro builds up resets. So those 10 minutes are expected to set up a plot, a platform for the momentum to be built off again, but instead you have your characters do nothing. It also doesn't help that the one tiny little plot you had in those 10 minutes ends up having no relevance or point to the story whatsoever. But then finally, we have something happen. Natasha gets blown up in her car after trying to fix her electricity, and TaskMaster finds her. In that same scene, we find out that TaskMaster doesn't give a crap about killing her, he just wants these chemicals that she has. Black Widow ends up taking those chemicals and running away. And now, we finally have a goal. Now all we have to do is move towards it. Which seems fairly simple, right? Well, Black Widow then goes to her hot, attractive sister to find out more information on what those chemicals are. I don't remember her name, so I'm going to refer to her as Black Widow number 2. So Black Widow number 2 tells Black Widow number 1 that those chemicals that Taskmaster wants are these anti-mind control things, that the Taskmaster is part of this secret government thing that has all these elite soldiers that are actually under mind control, and those chemicals are what gets them out of the mind control. That's cool and all, but the problem with this scene is that it doesn't exactly move us towards our goal. All it does is make the goal more specific and makes it a bit more clear for us. But the movie seems to think otherwise, because we still don't move towards that goal. Because then Black Widow number 1 and Black Widow number 2 decide to go after Red Guardian to find out even more about the goal. At this point, we're almost an hour in the movie and still haven't moved towards our goal yet. You may not realize it, but when you watch a movie where the main character is making no progress whatsoever and is running in place, it makes the movie boring. So Black Widow number 1 and Black Widow number 2 take about 20 or 30 minutes of the movie to break Red Guardian out of the prison to learn more about the goal, and guess what happens? He ends up not knowing anything about it. So if you recap all of this, we didn't have a goal for 10 minutes, and then we find out what our goal is, and then instead of moving towards that goal, we just find out more about that goal and make it more specific. Then we waste about 30 more minutes to find Red Guardian to figure out more about that goal that we already know about, and he ends up not knowing anything about it, meaning we've been running in place for almost an hour, maybe even over an hour by now. But there's even more to it, so Red Guardian brings them to their mother to figure out more about the goal that we already know about, and they end up just sitting there for even more time. And here's when all of that wasting time really attacks the movie. So since the movie is almost over and our characters have made no progress towards their goal, what the movie essentially does is quickly grab those characters and stuff them into that goal in a matter of just 30 seconds. So essentially what happens is Black Widow number 1, Black Widow number 2, Red Guardian, and the mom all get captured by the goddamn evil government crook people, wherever the hell they are. And now we have this very long, boring scene of exposition stuffed down the audience's throat. It is a lot of exposition, and I mean a lot, to the point where it's almost impossible to pay attention to because of how goddamn boring it is. That big ugly exposition scene could have been avoided if you just had your characters moving towards the goal and figure everything out along the way. For the Red Guardian part, you could have just had it to where he does know about what they want, but Taskmaster finds them right when they're escaping and crashes their helicopter. Then Black Widow number 1 and Black Widow number 2 and Red Guardian all escape or whatever, and Red Guardian remembers that the mom is nearby, so they go by to pick up weapons and actually prepare for the finale of the film. That way they're actually moving towards the goal and figuring more about it at the same time. But that didn't happen, did it? And I feel like the lack of progression is really important when it comes to movies. And since this movie did it so terribly, that's probably why it felt so boring and why a lot of it just felt kind of messy. It's exactly because of that. So this is gonna seem like a weird comparison, but this movie kinda reminded me of Fast and Furious. And I mean the newest Fast and Furious, not the old ones. At this point, everyone watches Fast and Furious just to see the main characters survive stuff that they shouldn't survive. And when it happens, it's goddamn awesome. But when it happens in Black Widow, it's not really awesome. In fact, it kinda just brings you out the movie. So why does it work with Fast and Furious and not Black Widow? Well, it's because in Fast and Furious, it's all done on purpose, and we all expect it. I mean, the biggest selling point in the Fast and Furious trailer is when this car swung around an entire mountain. And I'm not saying Black Widow did some stupid stuff like that. I mean, there's just some moments where you're like, how? I mean, like an explosion went under her car and she flipped around 17 times and she didn't have a single scratch on her face. So you kind of just think to yourself, how? You could make the argument that it is a superhero movie, so of course she's gonna survive stuff she shouldn't survive, but like even Iron Man had a metal suit and he was still almost dead in his movie multiple times. So when your main character survives something like this in the beginning of the movie, then all the tension with the fight afterwards kinda isn't there because we just saw her survive an explosion, so her fighting a regular guy kinda isn't really scaring us because, well, you know, she just survived an explosion. Now, yeah, I know Taskmaster is no regular person, but, like, it's not like he ever really hurts her during the fights. In fact, she leaves the fight perfectly fine afterwards. And all of that tension could have been created if you actually had her injured after the explosion and she barely survives the fight. That simple. But now I'd like to point out a scene where all the tension is ruined before the fight even begins. When Black Widow goes for her sister, she's not too sure if there's an intruder in the house instead of her, but they talk to each other before they actually fight. Like, Black Widow has a suspicion that someone else is in the house, yet she's talking to that person she's suspicious about her sister stuff, and they're both talking to each other about like, oh, I haven't seen you in a long time, huh? So since the movie tells us that they know each other before they even fight, we feel absolutely nothing while they fight. We know that they aren't enemies and that they're just fighting because they want to fight, so what's the point of this scene? It builds nothing. Like, you can't tell us what's about to happen, and then when it happens, expect everyone to be surprised about it. That's not how it works. There was a scene before that where we find out Black Widow number 2 was actually mind-controlled and kinda evil, but we saw her get out of it, so we know she's not evil and that she's perfectly fine. I would also like to mention that right afterward, Black Widow falls off the entire apartment complex and bumps into every single pipe downward and is perfectly fine afterwards. I couldn't find that clip anywhere. Can you remember how Black Widow somehow survived this in the beginning of the movie? Well, it kinda happens again. Seriously, how can you show her survive something like this and then expect us to be scared when she's doing something like this? That's not how it works. You just can't have her survive 3 unrealistic things and expect us to be worried when she's in a regular ground-to-ground fight. However, there is one scene where there seems to be some sort of tension. When everyone's at the house together, the enemies invade them and they all get captured. It comes out of nowhere and it subverts our expectations because there is no evidence or lead up to this actually happening, but cool. Then it turns out that the mob betrays everyone to help the enemies capture them. And now we almost have tension until we realize the characters did something without us even seeing. Black Widow and her mother had swapped faces as masks, and they had a plan the entire time. We never got to see this at all. The movie just tells us, oh yeah, they secretly had planned something, by the way. Since the movie didn't show us that, we don't know if they planned more. We don't know everything after that is secretly part of their little plan or what else they have in mind. So how are we supposed to feel any tension whatsoever because you didn't show us that scene? And just like that, the Black Widow movie didn't have any tension whatsoever. There's a lot of things wrong with Taskmaster, kinda like how he can mimic moves, yet we rarely see that, and also kinda like how he's part of the secret hidden agency group, yet he wears shiny armor, and drives a big truck and shoots explosive arrows in the middle of a public city. Also, I just realized I've been calling her a he this whole time, I kinda forgot it was a girl. And this right here is my problem with Taskmaster, the identity. Now I know that sounds extremely sexist, so let me be more specific. The problem with identity isn't who it is, but more about what it means. Well, not what it means to us, but what it means to the main character, Black Widow. So earlier in the movie, we find out that Black Widow was responsible for a building exploding, and there was a little girl in that building, and she full on knew about that. Tragic, right? Well, tragic to us, but not exactly to Black Widow. We only see her mourn about this once in the entire movie, and she doesn't even cry about it. She just says, oh yeah, I kinda felt bad about it, I guess. And that explosion also has no effect on Taskmaster. She doesn't seem to give a crap that Black Widow did that to her. In fact, she just ignores it. She acts like that never even happened to her, so what's the point of that? In fact, after Taskmaster gets out the mind control, her and Black Widow become best friends forever. Wouldn't it have made more sense if Taskmaster got out the mind control right after she was unmasked and all the fighting afterward was completely based on the emotion and regret of Black Widow exploding the building she was in? But since Taskmaster doesn't care about the explosion and Black Widow has barely mourned over at all, the identity has no meaning. The identity of Taskmaster has no meaning to Black Widow, and the identity of Black Widow has no meaning to Taskmaster. And the movie has been hiding the identity the entire time, and when it finally reveals the identity, it ends up having no meaning to the main character. And if it has no meaning to the main character, then why should we care? So yes, I do think the identity of Taskmaster is the worst thing about Taskmaster, but not because of who it is, but because of what it means. So in my opinion, those are the three biggest problems this movie suffers from. And if I were to rate this movie out of 10, I would give it a 3 out of 10 for all the reasoning I just gave.